Hello everyone, and welcome to the Chapter 9 overview, the Darwinian Revolution. Once again, Gribben puts quotes around Darwinian Revolution just as he did the Newtonian Revolution, because this is really an evolution of an idea. Darwin added a very, very important part, and that's why he's given credit for it, but we'll come back to that in a second. First, some notes about the course itself. The midterm grades will be emailed to you as soon as possible, probably this week into next week. I finished the multiple choice questions, and the vast majority of you guys did really, really well, but I'll be reading the essays this week. Our optional field trip to the Wagner Free Institute of Science is this Thursday. Please meet me in the lobby of the Wagner at 1 o'clock, Thursday, October 29th. The Wagner is at 17th and Montgomery. It's just a 3-minute walk from Broad Montgomery. Just go west on Montgomery. Our first paper is due this Friday at midnight. Refer to our Blackboard site for details of the paper. For the second half of the course, we will read 6 chapters, not 8 that we did in the first, 6 chapters from chapter 9 to 14. This is the next 6 chapters of the book. And remember, while you're doing chapter 9, which is on Darwin and his influences, and please watch the 2-hour documentary that's at this link. It's on YouTube. Okay, let's get to the chapter. You're going to read about a geologist by the name of Charles Lyell, who was a huge influence on Darwin. You'll also read about Robert Malthus, who was a population expert who also had a big influence on Darwin's thinking. Notice now, though, that we're starting to get real pictures. This is a real picture of Charles Lyell as an older man, and we start to get photography into our scientists. Lyell publishes a book called Principles of Geology, which, if you look at the bottom right, it's published by John Murray of London. He will also publish Darwin's book. But Darwin reads this and realizes that geology has so much to say about how life has been on the planet for a long time and how it's changed over time. Here's the frontispiece of Principles of Geology, where he talks about different types of rock. There's the sea and a volcano. Now, the whole idea of, sorry for that typo, I should say Charles Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus, the whole idea of evolution was not new with Darwin. Basically, evolution says that life has been here for a long, long time and that life has changed. Now, over that time, now that might not seem like a very complicated idea, but remember that people up until this time thought that life, that different organisms were static, that they didn't change, and that they didn't ever become extinct. That was one of the things that Cuvier discovered when he was taking a look at fossils. He said, oh boy, organisms can really go extinct. So the fact that organisms change over time was something that Charles's grandfather, Erasmus. Now, don't be confused, because the name Erasmus ran in the Darwin family. This is Charles's grandfather that you're looking at right here. His brother was named after Charles Darwin's brother, Erasmus, who was also very close to Charles, was named after his grandfather. This grandfather wrote a book called Zoonomia, which is the laws of organic life, and he toyed with the idea of life changed over time. But the big difference here is he didn't know how it happened. The young Charles Darwin, this is a portrait of the young Charles Darwin, what to do with his life. Initially, Darwin thought that he would go into medicine, but when he went to medical school in Edinburgh as a young man, he discovered that he hated blood and just couldn't stand the idea of operating on people. Darwin had always been obsessed with life, and he was a hunter and a fisherman, and he loved studying life. But you couldn't make any money doing that, so he thought, well, maybe I'll become a parish priest, a parish pastor, because in those days, a parish pastor had limited duties so that he could pursue other hobbies or pursuits that he was interested in. But an interesting event happened in Charles's life, and that was the fact that in the British Navy in those days, the captain was not really allowed to fraternize or to basically be a part of the crew. He very much had to hold himself apart from the crew. And there was a HMS Beagle, which was a British ship, which was to do maps around the world, which was, the captain was Captain Fitzroy. And Fitzroy suffered from what used to be called manic depression, now we call it bipolar disorder. And it was very, very difficult for him to go on a long voyage and not have any social community and communication with people. So usually a person of the same social class was assigned, and usually that was a naturalist in the British Navy. Darwin was invited to join Fitzroy on this long, almost 6-year voyage of the Beagle. Now, the Beagle wasn't a huge ship. If you take a look at this cross-section here, this is a picture of the Beagle from 1832, and if you look on that top picture in the upper left, you'll notice it says the captain's storeroom and the captain's table just below that. The captain had a very small area. Darwin was to join him for many nights for dinner. The Beagle itself was about 90 feet long. It had a beam of almost 25 feet and drew about 12 feet of water. That means it was when it was fully packed with stores. Let's take a look at the trip itself. If we follow the line down from Plymouth, England, you'll notice that the Beagle sails to the east coast of South America, all the way down around South America up to Valparaiso and Lima, and then the Galapagos, and then to New Zealand, to Australia, through the Indian Ocean, around the Cape of Good, around Cape Town in South Africa, and back up to England. This voyage took from 1829 to 1835, a long time. Darwin did a lot of collecting and sending back to England all sorts of plants and animals, and described them, especially in the Galapagos, but really all over. Now, from 1835, Darwin, who had a fair amount of money, family money that was passed down, lived in this house in the upper left there. That's his study in the bottom right. And from 1835, he mulled over and experimented with evolution. He looked a lot at artificial selection. How did we breed pigeons? How did we breed plants? He did a lot of experiments. A lot of people don't realize that from 1835 to 1859, 24 years, Darwin was obsessed with the idea of life and how life changes. An interesting thing happens, though. A man by the name of Alfred Russel Wallace, and also a scientist and a collector, nowhere near the richness that Darwin had in his family. Alfred Russel Wallace had to send back, he would sell specimens to zoos, he would sell feathers of everything he found. He was a naturalist that explored Southeast Asia. Here's a map of what he did. And in 1858-59, Alfred Russel, let me go back here. He discovers lots of things. This is an illustration that actually did in a brief description of the flying frog. I thought you guys might find this interesting. But finally, after 24 years, Darwin publishes The Origin of Species in 1859. I want you to note a couple things. Why did he wait so long? Why did he wait 24 years? Darwin was a very shy, retiring person. He knew what The Origin of Species would mean to many people in his family, and he held off. And then in 1858-59, he gets a letter from Russel Wallace, which in a few pages lays out evolution through natural selection. And Darwin is flabbergasted. He's like so surprised, and he's like, oh my gosh. He goes to his friends and he said, look, this guy has nailed it. This guy has described how life changes through natural selection. He really deserves the credit. And his friends go, no, he doesn't deserve the credit as much as you do. You've been studying it for 24 years. You have to publish right away. And what we're going to do is we're going to have both of you present at the Royal Society on the same night, but you'll present first, Charles, and you'll be given selection. So it's just, or we'll be given credit. Sorry for that, for publishing and explaining how species change with natural selection. That was the big thing that Darwin discovered, was the mechanism by which evolution happens. So it's a really interesting story. You'll also read about Lamarck, a French naturalist. He thought that the way animals changed was that during their lifetime, see this giraffe here, that during that lifetime, the giraffe would keep stretching its neck. This was the same individual. And then, because they stretched their neck out during their lifetime, when they bred, they would pass that longer neck onto their offspring. And we know that that's not the way evolution works. It just works through natural variation, and whoever has those advantages will pass that on to their offspring. Okay, please keep in mind that from chapter 10, now this is chapter 9 that we're talking about, but from chapter 10 to 14, I will be asking you to read only selected sections of each chapter. So please make sure that you take a look at these video overviews before you read the chapter. Also, if you have any questions at all, contact me at that email. The last thing I'd like to do is there are quite a number of biographies of Charles Darwin. And I've read a number of them, but I have to tell you that I think this one is probably the best. If you have a chance for summer reading, it's called Darwin, The Life of a Tormented Evolutionist. Unquestionably the finest biography ever written about Darwin, as this reviewer said, Stephen Jay Gould, who's was a famous Harvard biologist. It's written by Adrian Desmond and James Moore. And if you really want to learn about Darwin the person and kind of the type of person he was, I think you'll find it really interesting. Okay, I hope you guys can make the Wagner Free Institute of Science the optional field trip for our History of Science, and we will see or hear from me next week on Chapter 10.